Reflections of One by Kemela 14, Chapter 1, Honest to God, New World. Paul Jefferson grunted as he bent to haul another stack of floorboards off the flatbed. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, glinting off his sweat-slicked skin and turning his white undershirt translucent in places. His jeans were caked with dust, his construction boots scuffed and heavy with grime. Just another day on site. Until it wasn't. The board slipped from his grasp as the world around him vanished. The street, the heat, the roar of traffic, all gone in a blink. Paul staggered, weightless, into a space that defied comprehension. The ground beneath his feet was firm yet featureless, stretching in every direction in a greyish-white hue that seemed to glow faintly. There were no walls, no ceiling. Just endless nothing, tinged with a colourless light. Around him stood dozens, maybe hundreds, of other people, equally confused, equally out of place. Some shouted, some cried, others spun in circles, calling for loved ones who weren't there. And then the voice came. It didn't enter through his ears. It bored into his mind like a drill made of thunder. Silence. Paul dropped to one knee, clutching his head. Around him others fell too, groaning or screaming in pain. It was like being hit by a thought shaped like a freight train. You are all chosen ones, sent to a world of danger. Survive, and the blessing remains yours. Fail, and you will perish. Now select a card. This is the only help I offer. Just as suddenly as it came, the voice vanished. The pressure in Paul's skull released, leaving a dull throb in its wake. Then the air shifted. Cards filled the space, hundreds of thousands of them, fluttering in like leaves caught in a windless storm. They danced and spun, each one the size of a playing card, yet strangely radiant. Gold, silver, green, blue, purple, orange. No images, no words, just the back of a card on both sides, shimmering, unknowable. The crowd broke. Some people screamed, others lunged. A few collapsed in place, unwilling to play the game. But most reached out, and as soon as they touched a card, they vanished in a flash of light. Gone, just like that. Paul stood motionless, watching the numbers thin out. His heart thudded in his chest. The cards continued to drift, unbothered by the chaos. He spotted an orange one flickering nearby, almost lazily weaving toward him. He didn't know why, but he liked the color. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, light exploded around him, warm, searing, consuming. Then there was nothing. Paul didn't resist as the light consumed him. He simply let go, body and soul dragged through the veil. But his mind? It drifted elsewhere. At 32, Paul Jefferson had very little tying him to the world he left behind. No wife, no kids, no friends worth calling. College had been a bust. 2 years of debt, stress and disappointment before he dropped out and started hauling lumber and tools for whoever was hiring. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. He was good at it. Still, it always felt like life had handed him a trash hand and smirked while he played it. The flatbed truck, still paying that off. The apartment, mold in the corners, rats in the walls, and a landlord who didn't believe in heat. His only real assets were a half-dozen shirts, 2 pairs of jeans that still fit, and a mountain of student debt tied to a degree he never finished. Family? Gone. He didn't even like thinking about that part. Tossed out years ago for reasons that didn't matter anymore. No birthday calls, no holidays. No hey, just checking in. So no, he wasn't panicking like the others had. Maybe this was a blessing. A clean slate. Either he made something of it, or he didn't. Same odds as before, just a different backdrop. Maybe this is what I needed, he thought, as the world blurred around him like smeared oil paint. Then, impact. A hard jolt threw him forward, and he slammed shoulder first into packed dirt. The light was gone, gravity was back, pain too. Shit, he hissed, sitting up and clutching his left elbow. It throbbed, and a sharp burn flared under the skin, probably where he landed. He looked around, blinking against the sunlight. He was outdoors. A wide training yard stretched around him, surrounded by low stone walls and empty wooden racks. 2 straw dummies leaned on spears rammed into the earth, and 5 circular arrow targets stood unevenly nearby. He must have knocked one over in his landing because it lay to the side like a broken wheel. The air smelled like hay, leather, and distant smoke. It looked like something straight out of a medieval film set. Or a game. Paul groaned, getting to his feet slowly, brushing dirt from his jeans. The sky overhead was a rich, cloudless blue. Somewhere nearby, he heard the clang of steel against steel. This was real now. The voice was gone, the cards were gone, he was alone. And yet, something stirred inside him, a tingle just under the skin, like a program booting up. Why is there a peasant in my yard? The voice rang out like a cracked bell, sharp and full of irritation. Wenris Alrum stood at the edge of the training ground, frowning as though Paul's very existence had offended him. He was clutching a child-sized wooden practice sword, and despite his age, nearly 14, he wore it like a badge of honor. His silken, ruffled shirt shimmered in the sunlight, matched by tailored burgundy pants that had never seen a speck of dirt. Soft blue hair framed his youthful face like it had been painted by an artist with expensive tastes, and his emerald eyes radiated aristocratic disdain. He had come out here to vent, smack a few straw dummies around, take out the day's frustrations with elegant swings and noble posture. Instead, he found this, a dirty man in a sweat-drenched undershirt and loose, stained jeans slowly rising from the dirt like a confused animal. Paul rubbed his elbow, blinking up at the boy, disoriented. "Grivali," Wenris snapped, voice cracking. "Toss this man into the prison. I'll question him later. For now, I want to train, alone." Grivali, the knight standing off to the side in full-plate armor, sighed through his teeth. The summer heat was a curse, and the last thing he wanted was to swing a sword in it, unless he could do so in a nice, cool underground dungeon. Finally, he muttered to himself. He reached for the hilt of his sword, more for show than intent. Up, now, hands where I can see them. Paul raised both arms without protest. All right, take it easy, Tin Man." Smart move, Grivali thought. The man didn't look like a threat. Short brown hair, tired brown eyes, and the kind of stubble that said, "I don't have time to care." His arms were thick, shoulders broad, hands rough with old calluses. A laborer, clearly, maybe a woodcutter. But what kind of woodcutter randomly materialized in a noble estate? Grivali glanced back at the straw dummies. One had been knocked over. The man looked sweaty, sore, and very much out of place, but not malicious. Still, orders were orders. He marched Paul across the yard and down a narrow stone stairwell to the estate's lower levels. The cool air of the underground was a welcome change. With a practiced gesture, Grivali opened a cell door and motioned Paul inside. The door clanged shut with finality. Grivali leaned against the cool stone wall in the adjacent room, took off his helmet, and let out a breath that was half exhaustion, half relief. Let the young lord swing his little stick. At least down here it was quiet. To Paul's relief, he could understand the language here. He wasn't sure how, but when the noble kid barked orders and the knight grumbled complaints, the words made perfect sense. More than that, he could speak it too. It definitely wasn't English, but his mouth formed it naturally, like he'd always known it. Just another weird point in a long list of today's nonsense. He stayed quiet, offering no excuses, no protests. Experience had taught him that in situations like this, cooperation was the best camouflage. Be the stone in the stream. Let the water rush past. From the corner of his eye, he studied the boy, young, maybe 13 or 14. That blue hair wasn't dyed. It looked natural, every strand glinting faintly under the sun. The knight, seen from behind as he removed his helmet, had deep crimson hair as vivid as a drop of blood. Not a wig, not a quirk of lighting, just Real. Yeah, Paul thought, definitely not Earth. Now, in the cool, quiet dimness of a stone cell, he finally had a moment to breathe. The walls were thick, the air smelled faintly of moss and old iron, and the flickering torchlight danced shadows across the rough stone floor. And then, ping. A flicker in his vision. Not sound, not touch, just something there. A translucent screen hovered in the air before him, pale and weightless, like a thought-given shape. Welcome to the Survivor system. You have been granted an ability. Would you like to view it? Paul blinked, then smirked. Well, that took long enough. He tapped yes. The screen shimmered, shifted, and revealed a line of text in soft blue lettering. Skill unlocked. Another self. Upgradable. Description. The survivor may create avatars to his design within current limitations. These limitations may be lifted, or new avatar templates unlocked, by fulfilling specific achievements. All avatars share the same core mind and soul, though they may think and act independently. The original is linked to all avatars and benefits from their acquired bonuses. Avatar death results in the loss of all their bonuses, and the slot becomes empty. Avatars may be recalled into the original at will, but must return to their location manually afterward. Current avatar slots available. 1. Paul scratched his chin, staring at the lines. That's a lot to unpack. His voice echoed faintly in the cell. Still, the implications were clear. This is a cheat code. A damn good one. Another screen popped up, a new prompt with the option to begin avatar creation. He accepted. A glowing figure appeared in a box, a mirror image of himself at first. But instead of sliders or dials, Paul could adjust it simply by thinking. He focused, and the figure shifted. Long, silky green hair, blue eyes, a leaner, more refined build, a softer face, and, why not, long ears, subtle and sharp. It was almost elfin in appearance. Strange how easily it came together. When he was satisfied, he nodded and hit confirm. Avatar created. Awaiting deployment. Paul exhaled slowly and leaned back against the cold stone wall. The cell might have been a prison, but for now it was a fortress of solitude. Let's see what kind of world I just stepped into. Wenris Alrayam did not hold back. His wooden training sword cracked into the straw dummy with sharp, furious swings, scattering hay with every blow. His aura, still raw and barely shaped, flickered faintly around his limbs. He couldn't yet channel it properly, let alone coat his weapon with it like the real knights did. But even so, both dummies had been reduced to tatters. The physical exertion helped. With each strike, his frustration ebbed. He had reason to be upset. Born a high noble, the second son of House Al-Rayam, he had expected, hoped, that at least one member of his family would attend his 14th birthday. But his father had gone on tour with his elder brother, too busy with border inspections and noble alliances. His mother, she'd taken his younger sister to the capital, where the two of them were no doubt enjoying silk markets, plays and perfume balls. And him? He had been left behind. The border estate, as it was called, was a gift for second sons, an inheritance more symbolic than practical. Sure, a few lesser noble brats accepted his invitation out of obligation or ambition, but it wasn't the same. Not one of them came for me. The bitterness dulled as he slowed his strikes, lowering the practice blade. His thoughts drifted, unexpectedly, to the strange man found in the yard. A peasant, supposedly, but even that felt off. The man's hair had been a plain, muddy brown, so unremarkable it was almost fascinating. Wenris couldn't remember ever seeing that color before. Even the poorest peasants from the border villages had hair in shades of mossy green, sapphire blue, or storm cloud gray. Brown wasn't just uncommon, it was alien. The man had said nothing, hadn't pleaded, hadn't tried to defend himself or explain, just stood there, arms raised, calm as a cow before the butcher's knife. That composure bothered Wenris more than anything else. Maybe he'd spare him. Just a couple of lashes, a formality, far more merciful than what most nobles would have done. And if the man survived the punishment without fuss, perhaps he could make use of him. A servant with strange features had novelty value after all. Lost in thought, Wenris turned a corner and nearly collided with a tall figure in red armor. Grivali jumped back with surprising grace, narrowly avoiding the impact. "Apologies, young lord, I was in the way." "At ease," Wenris replied, steadying himself. "It was my fault. I wasn't watching." He liked Grivali. The knight was young but dependable, always polite, always ready to spar without holding back. And unlike most other retainers, Grivali didn't grovel. He had a spark of personality. Wenris appreciated that. "Where is he?" "The second cell," Grivali said with a sheepish smile, scratching the back of his head. "First one's door latch is still busted. I meant to call the smith last week." Again. Wenris gave him a faint smirk. "Dust mites don't complain much, do they?" "No, young lord," Grivali chuckled, "but this one might." Chapter 2. A New Role. Paul sat cross-legged on the stone floor, arms resting calmly on his knees as the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The cell door creaked open, and in stepped the blue-haired noble boy from earlier, looking as proper and proud as a prince from a storybook. "I am Wenris Alrium, second son of Duke Alrium," the boy announced, standing tall despite his youth. His silk-trimmed shirt and sharp eyes gave him the air of someone used to being obeyed. "So tell me, who are you, and how did you end up on my estate? And be warned, if you lie, I'll make sure your punishment is doubled." Paul met his gaze without flinching. "My name is Paul, young lord. I'm a simple hauler by trade. Somehow, I was teleported into your yard. I landed hard too, knocked over one of your archery targets mid-flight." To emphasize, he raised his arm and pointed to the darkening bruise on his left elbow. "Teleported," Wenris echoed, his tone shifting from accusation to curiosity. "Were you near a mage, or caught in some kind of battle?" "I'm afraid not," Paul replied with a shake of his head. "One moment I was hauling lumber. Next thing I know, I'm headfirst in your dirt." Wenris's emerald eyes narrowed. He glanced at the medallion in his palm. Its glow remained steady. "Truth." The boy's stern expression softened just a little. "Humph. Unfortunate. I was going to order 2 lashes for trespassing. But if you really had no control over your arrival, then perhaps punishment would be unfair." Paul blinked, surprised. "That's unexpectedly fair." "In fact," Wenris continued, tilting his head thoughtfully, "I have a better idea. As second son of a duke, I have the right to employ whomever I choose within my estate. So, Paul, you're hired." "But my lord," Grivali stepped forward, voice lowered but firm, "we don't even know who this man is." "Right," Wenris nodded, then turned back to Paul, holding the medallion plainly in his palm. "Tell me, have you ever committed a crime, other than this trespass?" "No, sir," Paul said honestly. "And have you ever worked with shady individuals?" "If by shady you mean employers who didn't pay for honest work, then yes," Paul replied with a dry smirk. "But nothing illegal." Wenris stared at the medallion. It stayed calm and blue. "See?" He flashed the amulet at Grivali with a smug smile. "He passes." The knight exhaled through his nose and reached for the cell keys. He muttered something under his breath that no one caught as the lock clicked open. "Come," Grivali said, stepping aside. "The Lord is merciful, and you'd best praise the ground he walks on for allowing you to work here." Paul gave him a crooked grin. "Got it. Long live the Lord and all that." As Paul stepped out of the cell, Wenris turned on his heel. "If you have family, I'll arrange for part of your wages to be sent." "No one, sir," Paul answered, more matter-of-fact than melancholic. Wenris paused briefly. Sad, but even better." Before Paul could ask what that meant, the young noble was already walking away. "Have Horatio put him to work," Wenris called back, "and tell the head butler I'll deal with his complaints if he has any. Grivali sighed again. The head butler will have complaints, he muttered, then motioned for Paul to follow. Come on. You're lucky. Lord Wenris has taken a liking to you. Let's hope you don't waste that. The estate's interior was every bit as grand as Paul expected. Arched halls of polished stone, high ceilings framed with dark timber, and windows so clean they looked like air. Paintings of stiff-looking ancestors lined the walls, staring down with noble disapproval. Grivali walked briskly, glancing back occasionally to make sure Paul hadn't wandered off or vanished. Eventually he stopped at a large double door, knocked twice, and pushed it open. Inside was an office neat enough to perform surgery in. A desk of dark wood dominated the room, flanked by towering shelves of neatly labeled ledgers. The scent of ink, parchment, and a hint of citrus polish hung in the air. Behind the desk stood a man with sharp posture, colder eyes, and the most finely combed mustache Paul had ever seen. Horatio, Grivali said, a new worker for your department. The old man didn't look up immediately. He finished scratching something into a ledger before placing his pen with mechanical precision onto an inkwell. Only then did he fix his gaze on Paul. Let me guess, Horatio sighed, voice crisp as autumn leaves. The young lord hired you himself. Yes, sir, Paul replied. Of course he did. Horatio closed the ledger with a soft thump. And naturally, he failed to consult me or arrange a proper vetting. I suppose so. Horatio massaged the bridge of his nose like a man accustomed to disappointment. Second sons and their whims. Still, duty was duty. He stepped around the desk and motioned for Paul to follow. Come, if I must work with a surprise, I may as well make the best of it. They moved through the estate's inner workings, a different world from the pristine halls above. The air was warmer, the sounds louder, clattering pots, shouted orders, the aroma of roasting meat and fresh herbs. This is the kitchen, Horatio announced as they passed through. You will not work here. Our cooks value silence and precision, and I doubt a stranger to the estate would survive long near cleavers and boiling oil. They exited into a stone path surrounded by hedges and small trees. Beyond it sprawled a large garden, half herbs, half vegetables, all neatly organized. This is where you will work. Our gardener retired 2 weeks ago and hasn't been replaced. You'll weed, water, harvest, and haul. No glamour, but it keeps your hands busy. They continued to the side gate, and you'll run errands. The estate has daily needs, groceries, cloth, lamp oil, and dozens of other things. You'll be given coin to shop in town. If you decide to run off with it. Horatio stopped and turned to him, eyes narrowing. You'll be hunted down, shackled and flogged. I assure you, nobles have long memories and longer reach. Understood, Paul said plainly. I'm not going anywhere. Good, Horatio said, as if that were only mildly reassuring. Now let's find something for you to wear. They returned to a side storage room with neatly folded butler uniforms stacked by size. Horatio produced a worn measuring tape from his breast pocket and gave Paul a series of curt instructions. Arms out. Turn, sit straight. After scribbling some notes, he clucked his tongue. One of the spare uniforms is close enough. It will need minor adjustments. He rang a small bell, and within minutes a young seamstress arrived. Horatio gave her instructions in clipped tones, handed over the uniform, and waved her off. By nightfall, you'll be dressed properly, he said. Until then, avoid being seen by the guests. They don't need to know the staff is still being baked. Paul managed a faint smile. Thanks. I'll do my best not to disappoint. Horatio paused, then gave him a brief nod. See that you don't. The quarters given to Paul were modest but clean, better than he expected, honestly. A simple stone-floored room with 4 wooden beds spaced evenly against the walls, each with its own footlocker at the foot. The walls were bare, but the single high window let in enough light to keep it from feeling like a cell. Could be worse, he thought, kicking off his boots with a tired grunt. Hell of a lot better than that apartment back home. He hadn't summoned the avatar. Not yet. No point in stirring up suspicion. Dropping a random stranger with green hair and long limbs into the servant's wing would be asking for questions he didn't feel like answering. Not until he was off the estate grounds. For now, he'd play the role of obedient drifter. A maid had passed by earlier in the afternoon, wordless and efficient, leaving behind a small plate with a chunk of bread and a single apple. It wasn't much, but it filled the hole in his gut and tasted real, at least. Later, just as the sun's light began to soften into gold through the window, a young maid reappeared, this time with the altered uniform. She didn't speak, just handed over the folded outfit, gave a polite half nod, and turned on her heel to vanish down the hall. Paul unfolded the uniform carefully. Sturdy material, plain black with subtle silver trimming, and a high-collared vest over a crisp white shirt. It was surprisingly comfortable when he tried it on, though the boots would take getting used to. Not long after, the door creaked open again. Two young men stepped inside, both dressed in matching butler uniforms, clearly more worn in than Paul's fresh set. One gave a quick nod and moved to the far bed without a word, flopping down with the practiced exhaustion of someone who didn't waste energy on small talk. The other was more curious. "Hey, new guy," said the one with messy blonde hair and a chipper tone. "Name's Rick, that's Tim." He thumbed toward the quiet one. "He doesn't talk much, don't take it personally." Paul gave a small nod. "Paul?" Rick dropped onto the bed nearest to him and leaned back on his elbows, eyes roving over Paul's attire before he changed. "So where you from? Horatio give you hell yet? And, what are those clothes anyway?" Paul smirked faintly as he stripped off his dirt-caked undershirt, folding it neatly beside his footlocker. "I'm just someone without a family. Went where the work was." Rick whistled, not unkindly. "That's half the staff here, you know. You'll fit in." "As for the head butler," Paul added as he buttoned his new shirt, "he's strict, sure, but not cruel, just likes things a certain way." "That he does," Rick agreed with a grin. "Once saw him scold a maid for setting the spoons a thumb too far from the napkins." Paul chuckled. "Figures." Rick tilted his head, eyeing the jeans Paul had folded away. "Still, never seen clothes like that, loose and rough. Not even dock workers wear stuff like that around here." Paul shrugged. "It's just what people wore where I came from." Rick hummed, clearly unsatisfied but willing to let it go for now. "Well, hope you like gardening. You've got the worst chore." "So I've heard," Paul muttered, slipping on the new black boots. "Thanks for the warm welcome." Rick just grinned, throwing himself back on his bed with a dramatic groan. "You're welcome. Enjoy the silence while it lasts." A nudge to the ribs dragged Paul from sleep. Up," Rick whispered. "Dress quick, or Horatio's gonna step on your toes. And I don't mean it figuratively." Paul groaned but swung his legs over the side of the bed. The early light was barely filtering through the narrow window, but the rest of the servants were already up, boots thudding, collars straightening, sleeves buttoned with militaristic efficiency. He dressed fast, uniform crisp, vest neat, boots tight, and joined the line forming in the main hallway. The servants stood like soldiers, and soon the rhythm of the morning began. Horatio arrived precisely on time, flanked by a tall, severe woman with her white hair pulled into a tight braid. She wore black with a hint of violet lace at the cuffs and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Bellana, the head maid, barely spared the line a glance as Horatio began calling names and doling out orders. Tim, silver polishing. Rick, garden sorting. Lena, laundry. Then, "Paul," Horatio's voice cracked like a whip, "down to Pellhall, 24 eggs and milk." He turned slightly, barely moving his shoulders. "Rick, go with him. Show him where to buy what. If he messes up next time, both of you get punished." "Yes, sir," Rick snapped with practiced energy. "Yes, sir," Paul echoed, standing straight. Horatio gave a curt nod, then tossed a small leather pouch at Paul. It jingled with coin. Let's see how good a worker you are. Rick nudged Paul's elbow as the line dispersed. Come on, new guy, let's get your first errand done without making a scene. They ducked through the service corridors and into the back of the kitchen. A cook handed over a padded wicker basket and a copper canister, both built for durability. Baskets for eggs, Rick said. Grass keeps them from cracking. Canisters for milk. Return it full, not leaking. Got it. As they stepped out into the morning air, Rick glanced over at him. You ever been to Pell Hall before? Paul smiled, honest but evasive. Never in my life. All right then, Rick chuckled, leading the way down the stone path. Try to keep up. Paul, on a whim, gave a sweeping bow with his arm out and one leg forward, like a character in an old historical drama. Lead the way, sir. Rick stopped, stared, then burst out laughing. Wrong leg, way too deep, and both hands should be at your sides. But hey, A for effort. Paul grinned, falling in step beside him. The walk to Pell Hall was short, barely 10 minutes, but for Paul it felt like stepping into a whole new world. The winding dirt road curved past farmland, orchards, and a slow-moving creek. Birds sang in unfamiliar patterns, and the smells were richer than anything he'd known back home. The town itself was no sprawling metropolis, but it was far from a village. With more than 50 buildings, not counting the large towered temple near the square, it had a liveliness to it. Stone and timber houses lined the roads, their shutters open and laundry already hung to dry. People bustled through the market lanes with baskets and carts. Blacksmiths hammered away, shopkeepers shouted prices, and a few children ran barefoot through the dust. It was the first time since arriving that Paul truly felt it. This is not Earth. The streets of Pell Hall bustled with morning energy. Vendors shouted about fresh bread, cloth bolts, and fish caught at dawn. A horse-drawn cart rolled past, squeaking under its load of firewood. Townsfolk moved like a tide, some chatting cheerfully, others wrapped in their own errands. Paul stuck close behind Rick as the young butler pointed out key landmarks. That's the baker. You'll want her for eggs. She's picky, though. Always count them before you pay, Rick said, waving toward a stone shop with baskets of bread stacked outside. Milk's from the dairy stall past the well. Big red canopy. Smells like goat. Paul nodded, memorizing the layout. They passed a narrow alleyway between two buildings, shaded, half hidden behind hanging laundry. This'll do. He let his foot drag just a little and veered half a step off course, just enough to be covered by Rick's sweeping gesture. Summon Avatar. The mental command triggered like muscle memory, a flash, quiet, inward, and then it happened. He saw twice. A second vision opened within his mind, like another window overlapping his own. It was disorienting at first, seeing the dusty street and Rick's back and the shadowed alley from a different angle. His balance wobbled briefly, a double echo of movement flickering between both bodies. He took a step that felt too light, then too heavy. Rick glanced back. You good? Paul blinked twice and steadied himself. Yeah, just stepped into a shallow pothole. Rick shrugged and turned forward again, satisfied. Gotta watch your step. These streets are cursed by random dips. Meanwhile, in the alley, the Avatar opened his eyes. He looked sharp. Green hair like polished silk flowed behind him, and his blue eyes were calmer, more calculating than Paul's. His frame was slimmer, his gait smoother. He stood like someone born to intrigue, not labor. He took a moment to stretch his arms, testing the weight of his new form. Thoughts ran independently of Paul's, reflections that felt familiar but not echoed. Then he nodded to himself. I'll scout around and gather what I can about this place. The Avatar murmured under his breath, voice softer but resolute. Name, Averius. That should do. With practiced poise, Averius stepped from the alley and flowed into the crowd, slipping into the rhythm of the town like a shadow returning home. Back in his own body, Paul kept walking, still stunned by the sensation of being two people at once. It wasn't quite like multitasking, it was like being two different hands of the same mind. Separate yet linked. Whole yet divided. This is wild, he thought, adjusting his grip on the basket. And yet, it felt right. Avarius was Paul in nearly every way. Same mind, same instincts, same soul, but he was not the same body. And that made all the difference. Yeah, this'll be okay, he muttered to himself, adjusting his sleeves. At least I'm not seeing double. Sorry, me. He chuckled lightly. As an avatar born of magic, his body was real, flesh and bone and blood. But it lacked true needs. He didn't hunger, didn't thirst. Still, the mechanisms were there, if only to play the part convincingly. For 2 hours, he wandered the alleys and crooked side streets of Pelhall, letting his steps blend into the rhythm of the city. He observed, listened, followed movement patterns, picking up whispers of things that didn't want to be found. Eventually, he spotted what he was looking for. A lone figure loitered in an alley near the tannery district, half hidden in the shadow of a leaning brick wall. Cloak draped low, stance cautious. Watching people pass. Avarius slid in beside him, leaning casually against the opposite wall. "Hey," he said coolly, "I need work." The man stiffened immediately, hand darting toward his belt. "Who are you?" the man asked, fingers closing around a worn knife hilt. "Just someone who needs coin and doesn't ask questions," Avarius said, eyes locked on the man's. The figure squinted, then slowly let go of the blade. You talk pretty for someone in the gutter." "Practice." The man hesitated, then gave a half nod. "No jobs right now, but the boss might like a new face, especially a fancy-looking one like you." He turned and gestured for Avarius to follow. They weaved through a crooked maze of alleys until they reached a squat, grimy building wedged between two storehouses. The windows were clouded with grime, the door slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sweat, old ale, and something metallic. A bulky man sat at a table, cracking sunflower seeds between his yellowed teeth and spitting shells into a mug. The cloaked man gestured lazily. "Boss, this flimsy-looking guy wants work." Then he slipped out the door without another word. The boss turned slowly, eyes bloodshot and heavy-lidded. "So, need money, huh?" he growled, then spat into the corner. "How deep in the shit are you to come crawling in here?" Avarius didn't miss a beat. "Flat broke. Oh, a night for a sword I broke. He gave me 5 days to repay him." The man snorted, then laughed, loud and wet. "Damn, you are fucked." He slapped the table. "I like that. Honest desperation." Then with a grunt, he reached under the table and pulled out a small, tightly bound parcel. No markings, just a hand-sized bundle tied with rough twine. "Take this behind the temple. When the bell tolls 10, hand it off to the guy waiting near the ivy wall. Come back if you're still breathing." Avarius stepped forward and took the parcel. "I'll get it done." "Love the enthusiasm," the man grinned, revealing crooked teeth. "Let's see if it keeps you alive." The bell of Pelhall's temple rang with solemn, deliberate tones. 1, 2, 3. By the time it tolled 10, Avarius was already waiting, leaned casually against the ivy-covered wall behind the temple, parcel tucked beneath his arm. The alley was quiet. Damp. A pair of pigeons picked at crumbs nearby. The sounds of the market barely reached this forgotten corner. Then footsteps. A man emerged from behind the temple's outer garden, a wiry figure with a twitchy gait, thin face half covered by a scarf. His eyes darted like a rat's, fingers clenched around a small, rusty dagger. "You the drop?" the man hissed. Avarius gave a small nod and started to step forward. Apparently, that wasn't enough. The fidgety man lunged without warning, dagger flashing forward. Avarius moved on instinct. His hand snapped out and slapped the attacker's wrist aside with a sharp crack. The dagger clattered to the ground and skidded into a shallow puddle. "Whoa now," Avarius said, tone still light. You try that again, and I might stop being polite. The man blinked in surprise, then cackled, an unhinged, childlike giggle. Without another word, Averius tossed him the parcel. The man caught it, eyes wide with a strange glee, and bolted into the shadows like a feral dog. The dagger lay behind in the mud, forgotten. Averius picked it up and twirled it once in his fingers. The blade was chipped, the grip worn, but it was still steel. "Not bad," he muttered, tucking it into his belt. "One errand, one weapon richer." Across town, behind the estate, Paul knelt in the soil, trowel in hand, and dirt staining his new gloves. He was grinning like an idiot. The sensation of movement, of vision and reflexes from another body, was electric. He'd watched Averius handle the alley encounter while trimming back overgrown herbs near the garden shed. It had taken effort to keep his chuckles from attracting attention. This is insane, he thought, but it works. By the time late afternoon rolled around, his duties were done, beds weeded, tools cleaned, and errands delivered on time. When he returned to the servant quarters, the scent of baked root vegetables, roasted chicken, and thick gravy welcomed him. The dinner was simple but hearty, and Paul dug in with a hunger he didn't fully realize he had. All the while, he could still feel Averius watching the streets, his second self drifting beneath the surface of the city like a ghost. "You want what?" Horatio asked, his normally composed tone cracking like old parchment. Wenris didn't blink. "I want Paul to serve sweets and drinks at my birthday party. He'll stand near the entrance and assist the guests with whatever they need. It'll look better if the help includes someone unique." Horatio pressed 2 fingers to his temple. "With all due respect, young lord, you want me to train a commoner in noble etiquette, presentation, poise, and service in 4 days?" "Yes." 4. Yes. Horatio stared into the middle distance as if trying to will an aneurysm into existence. Impossible. Absolutely unfeasible. Still, Wenris raised a single brow. "He's a quick learner." Horatio scoffed. But orders were orders. To the old butler's shock, Paul was a quick learner. He listened, he mimicked, he adapted. Where other servants needed weeks to perfect how to hold a tray without wobble, Paul got it in one afternoon. The bow, the neutral posture, the correct tone of address, all absorbed like water into a sponge. He must have come from a merchant's house, Horatio muttered to himself more than once. No farm-born learns this fast. What Horatio didn't know was that Paul, while technically a dropout, had gone to college. He'd sat through lectures, dealt with deadlines, and worked under pressure. Learning a new set of behaviors wasn't overwhelming. It was refreshing. Concrete goals, structured expectations. By the day of the party, Paul could have passed for a well-trained urban servant with years of experience. He even corrected Rick's posture once. Meanwhile, Averius had carved his own path, literally. What started as a shady job turned darker when a buyer tried to underpay, threaten, then draw steel. Averius had been faster. The knife had left scars along his side, but the body still stood. And in the end, the job paid out. 10 gleaming silver coins and a bloodied shirt. Highly illegal, highly profitable, and very, very dangerous. Paul recalled him the moment he was alone, locking the door to his servant quarters before giving the summon command. A shimmer of magic, a familiar figure. Averius appeared, his green hair slightly tousled, shirt torn where the scar lines crossed his ribs. He dropped the coin pouch onto the bed. 10 silvers, he said dryly. 1 dead client, 4 close calls. I recommend not repeating that run. Paul chuckled and jingled the coins. Not bad. I was already preparing to make a new you. Glad I could delay my own funeral, Averius replied with a smirk before vanishing back into the void of his slot. Paul opened his interface and checked the stats. Averius, unsummoned. Vitality, +2. Agility, +1. Not enough bonus yet to affect original. Still, it was something, and the experience had been more than just a payday. It had proven the system worked, really worked. He dressed carefully, servant uniform pressed, boots polished, collar straight. As the first guests began to arrive, Paul stood tall near the grand doors of the gala room, his silver-trimmed tray balanced perfectly in one hand. A commoner in the eyes of many. But in truth, Paul Jefferson now had two lives, and both were just getting started. The birthday party was nothing short of grand. Only 24 guests had been invited, but each arrived with at least 2 servants and a personal guard, filling the gala hall to the edges. The air was thick with perfume, polished silver, and noble chatter. Paul moved through it all with the grace of a practiced servant, silver tray balanced in one hand, his movements fluid and poised. The guests, strangely enough, seemed fascinated by his brown hair. More than once, a noble stopped him just to comment on it or to ask if it was dyed. He didn't question it. He just smiled, bowed slightly, and kept his pace smooth. As he passed one of the corner tables, he noticed a young maid standing stiffly, breathing hard, her eyes wide like a deer frozen in place. Paul veered over, lowering his voice. "Hey, you good?" The girl didn't respond right away. Her hands were shaking. "Calm down. Everything's going to be all right," Paul said gently. "Let me get you a glass of water." He turned and moved off, his tray nearly empty. A moment later, he returned with a fresh tray and a small glass in one hand. He offered it to her. She took it with both hands, sipped, then drained the whole thing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you." "No problem," Paul smiled. "First time out." "Is it that obvious?" she asked, looking horrified. "Only because I've been there. Just treat it like any other job. Do your best, stay calm, and remember who you're here for." The maid nodded slowly. "Right, thank you. I think I need to get back." "Take care," Paul said, then melted back into the crowd. Later in the evening, he was summoned to refill the young lord's tray, an honor among servants. Horatio stood at a distance, jaw clenched, practically daring Paul to fail. But Paul didn't. He served with the same quiet elegance as before, leaving no room for correction. Not long after, a young noblewoman approached. She said nothing, just pressed a small item into his hand before turning away. It was a silver button, delicately carved with a house emblem. Paul pocketed it without understanding, but the weight of it felt strange. By the time the guests had gone and the music died down, the real work began. Cleaning, packing, scrubbing until the hall gleamed once again. As Paul wiped down a long banquet table, he spotted Horatio giving final orders. He approached, the button in hand. "Horatio," he asked, "I got this from a noble. Any idea what it means?" Horatio turned, glanced, and froze. His eyes widened as he reached out and took the button, inspecting it. "No way," the old butler whispered, leaning against the wall like the air had left his lungs. "You got recognized. That means a noble promised you a favor, an actual personal favor." Paul blinked. "Seriously, I didn't do anything. I just helped a maid having a panic attack. That's all." Horatio looked again. "This sigil, Lady Mincera, that's a house under Earl recognition, and she gave this to you?" Paul nodded slowly. Horatio exhaled and placed the button gently back in Paul's hand. "Sew that into your left collar. Use just enough thread so it stays on. And keep it clean. That's a mark you don't want to lose." He gave Paul a rare smile and clapped his shoulder. "You might make something of yourself, son." Chapter 3. Reputation and Responsibility. Wenris Alram heard the news before he ever saw the proof of it. Paul Jefferson, the brown-haired servant he'd taken in on a whim, had become the talk of not just the estate, but the entire county. Word had spread quickly among noble circles. Lady Mincera herself had acknowledged him, a servant, a commoner. Now, lesser nobles were scrambling to imitate the move, suddenly desperate to hire anyone with brown hair just to follow the trend he had unknowingly started. And Horatio, His father's grumpiest, most conservative butler had spoken well of Paul. That alone could have made Wenris laugh out loud. Sitting in his study, gifts piled on one side, unopened and largely ignored, Wenris allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. "Grivali!" he called. The crimson-haired knight appeared in the doorway, sharp and attentive. "Yes, lord. I want Paul trained. Swordsmanship starting today." Grivali blinked. "Are you sure that's wise? The man's barely been here a week." Wenris's smile grew. "And that's exactly why I value your presence. You don't just nod like the others." He stood, walking slowly to the window, watching a pair of lesser nobles bicker by the guest gardens. "But trust me," he continued, "that man has potential, rare potential. I may not be my father, but I've been watching him. He adapts, he observes, and I'd rather have someone like that beside me with a sword than standing behind someone else." Grivali bowed, expression still unreadable. "As you command." Paul returned from his morning errand run, a small basket of fresh bread tucked under one arm, and his copper canister empty after the dairy drop-off. His other self, Averius, was still active, currently slipping deeper into Pelhall's underworld. A second body, a second life, quietly growing more dangerous with every day. At the estate gate, Grivali was waiting. "Hand that off to the kitchen," the knight said, nodding toward the basket. "You'll be training with me today, sword drills." Paul arched a brow, surprised. "Sword drills? All right then, Sir Knight, be right there." Truthfully, he had no idea how to wield a sword, but Averius had picked up a few things: how to feint, how to dodge, how to spot tension in an opponent's shoulders. Maybe some of it would transfer. Maybe his body would just know. That hope vanished within 10 minutes. Grivali didn't go easy. Paul failed to block the first strike, and the second, and the third. Wood cracked against his forearm, then his shoulder, his thigh. He gritted his teeth, trying not to grunt with each hit, but by the fifth clash he was already aching. His hands were too slow, his footing too clumsy. His instincts, still catching up. His whole body groaned from the punishment, but he stayed standing. Grivali, watching carefully, gave no words of comfort. Just a faint nod. "You didn't drop the sword. That's more than I expected." Paul smirked through the pain. "Well, I'm stubborn like that." The underworld of Pelhall had patterns. Like a spiderweb, each thread connected to a name, a coin purse, or a blade. And Averius knew the whole weave now. He'd spent over a week collecting names, watching deals, mapping every alley and lock. He'd stood in the smoke of the drug dens, listened to the whispers of the street runners, and even handled a few transactions himself, all with an easy smile and careful hands. Numberleth. That was the name of the poison, harmless in whispers, devastating in smoke, once a healer's salve, now an addict's curse. And it was flooding into the city through a rotting warehouse disguised as a fishery. It was time to tear it all down, but not as a thief. Back at the estate, Paul quietly sifted through the storage room where old uniforms and spare clothes were kept. He found what he needed: fine, simple merchant garb. A sturdy linen shirt with a dark vest, clean boots, and a charcoal-grey travel cloak. Averius reappeared in Paul's room that night and changed into the outfit with the ease of someone used to transformation. "You're not a thief anymore," Paul said. "You're a merchant, one who escaped." Averius smiled. "Just need the right kind of panic and a believable limp." The city guard barracks were solid stone and iron. Functional, weather-beaten, always alert. Inside, Commander Rilken leaned back in his chair, his beard grizzled, his eyes like flint. "You escaped from the drug den?" he asked, arms crossed. "Yes, Commander," Averius said, breath short, voice strained but measured. "They thought I was tied up for ransom. Got sloppy when they drank, talked openly. Names, routes, where they were hiding the next shipment. I listened. Then I got free when they passed out." He gestured to the bruises on his arms, the dirt still clinging to the edges of his cloak. I ran straight here. Rilken narrowed his eyes but didn't speak. Averius pushed the moment further. I had a trade caravan. They took everything. Burned my wagon. But if I can stop them, just tell you what I heard. It'll be worth the loss. Rilken stared another long moment, then nodded once. You say you heard names? Yes, sir. I can write them down. And I know the fishery where they're stashing the goods. The commander grunted and stood. Guards. Quiet detachment. 20 men. Wake the night shift. He gave Averius one last hard look. If this is a lie, it's not. The raid began 2 hours later, under the cover of dark clouds and torchlight. Averius moved at the head of the guard line, still limping slightly, but guiding them with sure steps. He led them through back alleys, into the hidden crawl spaces, down through the cellar vents he'd memorized during his infiltration. By dawn, the fishery was a pile of burned crates and shattered chains. 14 men arrested, 3 corrupted guards exposed, a poison trade destroyed, and the merchant gone before sunrise. That evening, back at the estate, Paul summoned Averius in the quiet of his room. The avatar emerged without a scratch, his fake injuries long since dropped. He carried a pouch, heavy with silver, and a sealed parchment bearing the mark of the city guard. Told you it'd work, Averius said, tossing both onto the bed. Paul opened the pouch, 30 silver coins, crisp and clean. The note read, "To the merchant known as Averius. You have the thanks of Pelhall's watch. Should you need aid, present this to any watch captain. We are in your debt." Paul chuckled and leaned back on his cot. Merchant, spy, hero. Not bad for a week's work. Averius had done more than just dismantle the underworld of Pelhall. He replaced it. With the previous ringleaders arrested or scattered, those who remained, the pickpockets, fences, smugglers, and grifters, needed new direction. Someone with presence, someone who could move between law and lawless with the same ease he moved through crowds. Averius stepped in. He didn't rule with terror or brute force, he ruled with precision. Information flowed from Paul like lifeblood. Notes about lesser noble houses tangled in illicit trades, guards with suspicious coin habits, or merchants with ledgers that never quite balanced. And Averius used it all. He approached small-time dealers first, then smugglers, then nobles whose family names had lost favor, offering protection and logistical assistance in exchange for loyalty. It was slow work, careful, quiet, but bit by bit, he was becoming a double agent, a man who could shake hands with both the city's law and its shadows, and no one dared question which side he truly served. And that's when it happened. The system shimmered. Achievement unlocked, spy. This boon is granted to both Avatar, Averius, and original survivor, Paul. +5 speechcraft, +5 stealth, +5 security. Paul grinned. He was hauling water buckets from the well to the maid quarters when the glowing text popped up in both sets of his vision. One here, one on the shaded rooftop where Averius sat, watching the alley below. "Well now," he murmured. The funny thing, both mouths said it, perfectly in sync, one carrying water, the other carrying a hidden blade. The mental load of dual living was getting lighter by the day. His mind adapted fast, thoughts flickering between his two lives without conflict. He could respond to a question at the estate while watching a dice game go sideways in the slums. The only problem: this fast mind didn't speed up learning, sword drills still left his muscles sore and bruised, and memorizing noble history and etiquette from Horatio's endless lectures was its own kind of punishment. "Baby steps," Paul muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Still, I wonder what the other survivors are doing right now." His week was full now. 4 days he spent half the day training in the yard, sweating under Grivali's stern gaze as he learned how not to get hit in the ribs. The other 3, he stood beside Lord Wenris, slowly earning the title of personal assistant. Horatio made sure every step was earned. Table manners, ballroom conduct, house politics, the difference between a count's son and a baron's heir. Paul was drilled on all of it, and he endured it with quiet diligence, because one self ruled the street, and the other, he was walking straight into the halls of power. Chapter 4. Another New Self. It had been 1 month since Paul Jefferson first arrived in this strange new world. 1 month of sword drills, etiquette lessons, quiet labor, and shadowy schemes. 1 month of becoming 2 men, 1 servant in the light, 1 agent in the dark. And now, the system had rewarded him. Skill level up, another self, level 2. You may now maintain 2 active avatars. Paul nearly dropped his training sword. The notification shimmered in his vision, bright and promising. He couldn't wait to finish the current round, already imagining the possibilities. Then, slam. Grivali's boot met his chest with the force of a falling tree, sending him skidding across the dirt. "You are not focusing," the knight said, voice as flat as stone. "Sorry," Paul coughed, shaking dust from his hair. "Just a passing thought." He closed the glowing screen with a mental flick and pushed himself upright, charging back into the drill. But his mind wouldn't stop racing. Far away, Avarius had just liberated a traveling circus from a lesser-known bandit group. The victory would have been clean had the circus not realized their saviors were also bandits, just organized ones. Avarius, now something of a known figure in the underworld, spared them a full raid and settled for a light toll. Still, the damage had been done. Their lead dancer had taken a knife to the thigh, trying to escape the original attackers. With her out of commission and their coin gone, the troop was on the edge of collapse. Paul took one look at that situation and got an idea. When Grivali finally dismissed him for the day, Paul didn't walk, he ran to his room. The moment he slammed the door shut, the creation screen bloomed into existence before him. Time to make a dancer. He paused for a long time before changing the gender. Then, things got awkward. The more beautiful he made the avatar, the more graceful, more alluring, more curved, the redder his face became. Long, cascading pink hair, smooth, flawless skin, a lithe figure that could rival a supermodel, complete with ruby red eyes that practically sparkled. He covered his face with both hands. "I am absolutely going to hell," he muttered, pressing confirm with his eyes closed. Avarius blinked as the summoning glow lit the alley beside him. A second later, she was there. The new avatar stretched her arms, twisted at the waist, and ran her fingers through that impossibly silky pink hair. "Damn," she said, admiring her reflection in a rain puddle. "These are solid." She turned and smirked at her green-haired counterpart. "How about Esmeralda?" she asked, then corrected herself. "Actually, how about I be Esmeralda?" "Well, you are me," Avarius replied, deadpan. "Exactly," Esmeralda said, already tossing her hair like a professional. "This is going to take some getting used to." Avarius handed her a modest set of traveling clothes, which she adjusted with surprising grace. Then the two of them made their way back to the circus. The circus leader, a grizzled man with a bushy mustache and a permanent frown, looked her up and down with suspicion. "This is Esmeralda," he asked, folding his arms. "She doesn't look like a dancer." "Not yet," Avarius replied, "but she learns fast, and she's graceful. Let her prove herself." "And what's the catch?" The man narrowed his eyes. "You just help us. For free." "You already paid your toll," Avarius shrugged. "And let's be honest, my men aren't exactly known for treating young women gently. She's better off here." The man grunted. "Fine, we'll feed her, but she works." Esmeralda smiled sweetly, her crimson eyes catching the lantern light like gems. "Oh, I'll earn my keep," she said with a wink. The sun rose on another busy day, and each of Paul's lives moved forward in tandem. In the halls of the Alriam estate, Paul adjusted to his new role as more than just a servant. He worked alongside Horatio and the staff with quiet competence, slowly building friendships with the maids, kitchen workers, and stable hands. He learned their names, shared meals with them, even offered to carry heavier loads when he had the spare energy. The brown-haired helper with calm eyes and a quick smile was fast becoming a fixture of the estate. Farther away, Averius drifted through the less savory corners of Pellhall, meeting with two-faced merchants, quiet killers, and lesser nobles whose coins were dirtier than their boots. He learned how to promise just enough to offer protection where law dared not tread. His network of unofficial partners grew, slowly, quietly, but with purpose. And in a dusty, patched-up circus tent outside the city walls, a dancer was born. Esmeralda stood in the middle of the ring, arms raised, posture straight, eyes closed. The morning sun poured through holes in the canvas roof, painting her in warm gold. She was barefoot, dressed in a simple performance outfit, thin silk skirt with silver beads, a cropped wrap top, and sleeves that flared at the wrist. Her long pink hair had been tied up into a high flowing tail, and she moved with careful precision. A young acrobat named Juno stood beside her, arms crossed. "No, no, no," she groaned. "You're too stiff. Dancing's not math, it's flow. You can't think about the next step while you're still stuck in the last one." Esmeralda nodded, frowning. Right, less thought, more feel. Which was easier said than done, until she let her mind split. She was Paul, she was Averius, she was herself. 3 minds, 3 angles, 3 perspectives, all working together. Paul's awareness of rhythm and timing, born of muscle memory and years of adapting. Averius's subtle control of his body, learned from dodging knives and weaving through drunks. Esmeralda's own growing sense of physical grace. She took a breath. Music began, a soft rhythm played on a worn drum and a wind flute. This time she didn't chase the beat. She danced with it. Her hips moved in small, hypnotic circles. Her hands traced arcs in the air like falling petals. Her feet glided, each step lighter than the last, as if the earth barely noticed her presence. Juno's mouth dropped open. "Okay, now that looked like dancing." Esmeralda smiled, breathless but beaming. "More think power," she said softly. "One new body. Guess it adds up." Juno blinked. "What?" "Nothing," Esmeralda winked. "Let's go again." That afternoon, as Paul carried freshly laundered linens through the estate hallways, he smiled softly to himself. At the same moment, Averius nodded along as a corrupt baron muttered about cleaning up a rival warehouse, already planning what favors to trade. And in a dusty tent filled with forgotten dreams, Esmeralda spun like wildfire beneath the silk-roofed sky, becoming not just a dancer, but a presence no audience could forget. For a full week, the circus became the center of joy for the region. Villagers, townsfolk, and even minor nobles came in droves, drawn by the promise of exotic acts, laughter, and escape. Music filled the fields, jugglers spun fire, acrobats flew through the air like birds on silk wings. But the act no one could stop talking about was the dancer with the pink hair. Esmeralda. She didn't just move, she entranced. Every step, every glance, every coy smile worked like a spell. Men stopped speaking mid-sentence when she appeared. Women whispered about her grace, wondering if they could ever move like that. She was magnetic, and it came with a price. Achievement unlocked. Lust Maiden. This boon is granted to both Avatar, Esmeralda, and original survivor, Paul. Plus 10 speechcraft when talking to men. Plus 5 agility. Paul stared at the message hovering in front of him while tying a ribbon onto a document for Wenris. He blinked once, then again. "Let's hope I don't become a man magnet," he muttered, shaking his head. His life at the estate had grown more refined. No longer a nameless helper, Paul now wore a tailored outfit made for a personal attendant. Dark vest, gold trim, and a perfectly pressed high-collared shirt. Still, he kept his boots, the work boots he'd arrived in from another world. They were cleaned and polished by a local shoemaker who spent far too long examining the soles and treading. Wide-eyed and muttering about craftsmanship no local cobbler could replicate. Luckily, the man was smart enough not to tamper with anything that belonged to Lord Wenris's staff. So Paul's favourite boots, broken in, comfortable as home, became his official shoes in the halls of nobility. His feet thanked him. Meanwhile, the circus packed up and began its slow journey toward the next town. Esmeralda moved with them, now a full member of the troupe. She was asked more than once if she'd been kidnapped by the bandits before Averius stepped in. She always gave the same answer. I only had a brother. I don't know where he ended up. It wasn't a lie, not really. In many ways, she was just a part of Paul. But to them, she was Esmeralda, star dancer, soft-spoken, a little mysterious, and wholly unforgettable. Averius was having a less pleasant time. His crew, the ones he'd brought up through favors and promises, had been bought out. A handful of silver and a better future had been all it took. Now he was in the back of a cart, hands tied behind him, bumping along toward the estate of Baron Ingle. His eyes were half-lidded, his back against the cart wall. Most people would be sweating bullets, trying to escape, bargaining, not Averius. He was whistling, a strange, aimless tune that none of the armed men around him recognized. Not cheery, not threatening. Just eerie, looping and lilting in a way that made their stomachs knot. One of the men kept glancing over his shoulder. The youngest of them shifted in his seat. What the hell is he doing? He's tied up, who cares? But they did care, because he didn't beg. Because he smiled. Because something about that tune made it feel like he was in control, not them. Back in the estate, Paul sneezed once, wiped his nose and muttered, "Someone's about to get a surprise." He had no idea how right he was. Baron Ingle's private hall reeked of expensive perfumes and desperation. The room was too warm, the curtains too thick, and the man seated on the cushioned throne-like chair was barely tall enough to be seen over his desk. Short, round and shiny as a roasted goose, Baron Ingle's oil-slick mustache twitched with smug satisfaction. Averius knelt in front of him, hands bound, guards at his back. His expression was neutral, almost bored. "You thought I wouldn't know?" The Baron chuckled, voice greasy as his appearance. "You tried to crawl into my affairs." "No, no, no. Peasant rats like yourself don't sit at the big table." He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And look where your little greed has taken you." Averius raised an eyebrow. "I know about 4th Street in Banella," he said evenly. "The girls you sell, the lie about your perfume factory. And if I vanish, all of that goes to Viscount Maruna." Ingle's smile froze. Averius's tone didn't change. "So here's the deal. Let me go, or you'll be the one on a chopping block." The Baron's face twitched before breaking into a mocking laugh. "You're in binds. You'll see the headsman tomorrow, you deluded sewer rat." Behind Averius, the guards shifted uncomfortably. The bound man turned slightly to glance back at his old crew, now defectors who had sold him out. "Well," Averius sighed, "it was nice knowing you all. If any of you make it out alive, maybe I'll give you another shot." Then, with a faint smirk, he turned to Baron Ingol. "Goodbye, fatso." And then he vanished. Just like that. No flash, no sound, just ropes slumping to the floor and the weight of presence gone like wind from a candle. Avatar Averius, recalled to origin. Location, Al Riyam Estate, Central Courtyard Gate. "No!" Baron Ingle's shriek echoed through the room. He stumbled up from his chair, eyes wide in horror. He had a mage. Why didn't any of you idiots check if he had a mage friend? He began to spiral, pacing in frantic circles. He knows everything. If he reaches the Viscount, my title, my head, my household all gone. His hand instinctively gripped his thick neck, as if imagining the executioner's axe. "Guards!" he roared, spit flying. "Kill these brigands, all of them." The mercenaries who betrayed Averius barely had time to draw breath before Ingle's personal guard descended on them. Back at the estate gate, Paul whistled softly, a calm smile on his lips as he made small talk with the guards. Averius shimmered into existence behind the wall, just outside their field of vision. Paul glanced to the side without turning his head. The avatar nodded once and walked away toward town, unnoticed. Paul exhaled contentedly. Shame I couldn't see his face when I vanished. Still, his imagination filled in the blanks quite nicely. Chapter 5. The Road to the Capital. The letter had finally arrived. Wenris Alreum, second son of Duke Alreum and lord of the border estate, held the parchment in his hands like it was a long-lost treasure. After nearly half a year of silence, his mother had written. Not just pleasantries this time, but an invitation. He was to join the family in the capital for the grand Summer's End dance festival. It wasn't just a gesture, it was recognition. He read the letter 3 times, then burst into a grin so wide it nearly cracked his usually composed facade. "Grivali!" he shouted, bolting from his study. The knight barely had time to respond before he saw his young lord actually skipping, down the stairs, parchment in hand. "Lord Wenris, slow down, you'll trip." "Let me have this, Grivali," the boy yelled joyfully. "We're going to the capital." Paul was halfway through his morning work, organizing the tea service in the side hall, when Wenris practically slid to a halt behind him. "Paul," he declared, "I'm going to the capital, and you are coming with me. Pack your things. We leave at dawn." Before Paul could respond, the young noble was already sprinting down the corridor toward the maid quarters, his voice trailing behind him like a kite tail. Paul blinked, then chuckled. "Well, someone's in a good mood today." "Indeed he is," Horatio said calmly, appearing at his side. Smack. The thin training stick rapped lightly against Paul's hand. "However," the old man added, "you are not. The cutlery must be arranged again. Pay attention to the forks this time." Paul grinned and got back to work. He didn't argue. Horatio's endless lessons had become part of his routine, like sword drills or managing avatars. And deep down, he could tell the old man was grooming him for something more. Horatio never said it, but the way he corrected, refined, and watched said plenty. The next morning, the estate came to life in a blur of activity. 2 carriages were prepped and loaded. The first, a finely kept coach with burgundy trim, would carry Wenris and Paul. The second, stacked high with trunks and travel goods, was for Cecilia, Wenris's personal maid, and the essential luggage. Grivali rode ahead, fully armored and mounted, flanked by 2 guards. As a level 5 aura user, he hardly needed the help. But nobles needed to appear protected, even if one of their guards could cleave a man in half with a single blow. Paul took his place beside Wenris in the front carriage, dressed in a fresh version of his formal servant uniform, boots polished, hair tied back, posture perfect. The wheels creaked, the horses snorted, and the gates of the Alreum estate slowly opened. They were bound for the capital, and Paul, once a lost man in a sweat-stained shirt, was riding toward the heart of power, seated beside the son of a duke. As the carriages rolled toward the capital, the world moved with quiet intent, each of Paul's lives setting into place like chess pieces before the match. Far to the east, Esmeralda traveled with the circus caravan toward Onutan, the kingdom's second-largest city. The same Summer's End festival was being prepared there, meant to rival the grandeur of the capital, if not surpass it in charm. Her reputation had already preceded her. Locals whispered of a dancer with hair like rose silk and eyes like polished rubies. But this time she wasn't just dancing, she was learning magic. Not the coin behind the ear kind, but real, dazzling performance magic. Small spells to create glittering lights that hung like stars, bursts of blue flame that coiled around her hands, and puffs of smoke that painted silhouettes in the air. Every night she practiced beneath the open sky, building her stage presence into something unearthly. To the south, Averius cut a far more serious figure. He rode alone, sharply dressed in a merchant's tailored outfit, atop a snow-white horse that had been acquired from a less-than-reputable dealer in Banella. The horse didn't seem to mind. Its hooves beat a steady rhythm across the road, content with its new owner. Strapped to Avarius's saddle was a thick leather satchel. Inside, documents, blackmail, confession notes, false ledgers and coded letters, everything needed to bury Baron Ingle 10 times over. Carefully sorted, cross-referenced and ready for presentation. With falsified merchant credentials and an air of casual confidence, Avarius passed every checkpoint without suspicion. By the time the sun reached its peak, he was already within the outer halls of Viscount Maruna's castle, sipping wine in the guest wing while waiting for his scheduled audience later that day. His smile never wavered. The trap had been set. And in the heart of it all, Paul sat quietly beside Lord Wenris, playing the role of loyal attendant, his eyes calm, his posture perfect, his mind 3 places at once. The stage was set, and the festival would begin soon. The magic was real now. Paul could feel it, warmth in his palm, a tingling in his fingers, a subtle weight of power ready to respond. Esmeralda's basic spellwork had done more than entertain crowds. It had transferred. Because she was part of him, her magic was his. A flick of thought brought a burst of glittering sparks. A pulse of focus summoned blue fire to dance above his palm like a flame-shaped ribbon. And with every flicker, every whisper of mana, Paul understood. Experience gained through performance was one thing, but magic was different. Magic echoed across all selves. He couldn't wait to test more. "Someone's in a good mood," Wenry said from beside him, poking his shoulder with a teasing smirk. Paul turned and gave a half shrug, half smile. "Of course I am, my lord. Less than 2 months ago, I was hauling lumber for 2 coppers a day. Look at me now." "It does suit you," Wenris nodded. "Strange, though, I'm a duke's son. But if I only count the past 5 years, I've spent more time with you than with my own father." His voice trailed into something between frustration and reflection. Paul glanced out the carriage window. "Reminds me of my own family. Tossed me out when I was 20. They said I was a failure and never contacted me again. Been alone since then." Wenris looked away, then back. "Then I swear this on my name, Paul. I'll make sure you get a good wife someday." Paul blinked. "That's oddly specific." Wenris smiled sheepishly. "You deserve it." There were a lot of things Wenris didn't fully understand about Paul, but the man clicked with him. He didn't flatter, didn't beg, didn't scheme. He just did his job, well, thoroughly, and without a whisper of complaint. And somehow, that made Wenris feel less alone. 2 nights and 2 towns later, the carriages finally rolled into the capital. Paul had seen cities before. This was not a city. The capital of the kingdom was a sprawling marvel of stone, glass, towers, gardens, and bustling roads. Different districts unfolded like chapters in a book. The trade quarter pulsed with commerce. The artisan's walk overflowed with color and sound. The slopes of prayer shimmered with temple spires. But nothing compared to the noble district. Located on the far eastern edge, it was bordered by walls twice the height of city gates and patrolled by elite guards in silver and blue. Every building inside looked like a palace, and every street was cobbled with care. Wenris's family manor was not just a home. It was a statement. Twice the size of anything nearby, with courtyards, balconies, and ivy-covered towers, the manor was so grand that Paul actually froze at the gate. For a brief moment, he couldn't quite believe he was supposed to enter. Cecilia nudged him gently. "You're not a guest, Paul. You work here." He nodded and got moving. With bags in hand, he helped unload the carriages and carry Wenris's belongings inside. The marble floors echoed with each step, and the scent of expensive oil and polished wood clung to the air. He wasn't just in the capital, he was inside it now. Onutan. If the capital was proud and elegant, Onutan was loud and alive. Esmeralda stood at the edge of the central plaza, her ruby eyes wide as they took in the sea of motion around her. Vendors yelled from under brilliant awnings, music spilled out from taverns and open shop fronts, and children ran between carriages shouting about sweetbread and shiny toys. The merchants' district stretched as far as the eye could see, an endless maze of shops, stalls, and shouting deals. But here, at the very heart of the plaza, a wide stone square had been cleared for performers, caravans, and festivals. It was big enough to host 5 full-sized circus tents side by side, and they were going to claim one of those spaces. "Don't just stand there looking pretty, Starshine," called Juno, the fiery-haired acrobat who'd taken to Esmeralda like a teasing older sister. "You're not the centerpiece until we've got a tent to stand under." Esmeralda smirked and rolled up her sleeves. Fair enough. The troupe exploded into movement. Heavy stakes were hammered into the plaza edge. Ropes were pulled and tied with practiced precision. The big tent, dyed rich sapphire and trimmed with gold thread, billowed like a sleeping giant as they raised it section by section. Brimley, the stout and forever sweating strongman, hoisted 2 support beams on his shoulders at once and barked orders like a drill sergeant. "No sagging ropes. Last time we nearly collapsed the east wing over the fire juggler's head." He gave Esmeralda a toothy grin as he passed. "And don't think you're above grunt work, Miss Twinkletoes." "Wouldn't dream of it," she said sweetly, dodging a coil of rope flying past. Mana, the beast tamer, strode by next. Her long black braid was wrapped tight and her hawk perched coolly on one shoulder. She gave Esmeralda a quiet nod. "You're doing good, Pink. Most performers don't touch setup." Esmeralda wiped her brow. "Well, I'm not most performers." Keep it that way." Then she was off, yelling at a nervous boy struggling to guide a pair of goats to their pen. Near the rear of the setup, Grent, the old illusionist with a walking stick carved like a dragon, lit his pipe and looked on with a half-lidded gaze. "Don't forget to check the lantern placements," he murmured to a passing crew member. "Last time you blinded half the front row during the finale." Then his eyes met Esmeralda's. "And you, Miss Dancer, your magic tricks are coming along nicely. If you're not careful, I'll lose my job." She grinned and gave a small conjuring flourish, flicking her wrist to summon a puff of glittering purple smoke. "Just adding some sparkle, Grant." "Humph. Keep your sparkle out of my pipe and we'll be fine." By late afternoon, the skeleton of the tent was up, and canvas shadows stretched across the plaza like wings. Inside, the ring was being leveled, the stands aligned, and lantern chains carefully hoisted to the center poles. Esmeralda moved with purpose between stations, hauling crates, adjusting velvet banners, and helping align the performer curtain. Everywhere she went, someone waved or grinned at her. She wasn't just a mysterious new addition anymore, she was one of them. And as night fell and the lights inside the tent began to flicker to life, Esmeralda took a moment to stand just outside the flap, watching the city bustle around them. Tomorrow they'd begin the show, and Onutan wouldn't know what hit it. The private audience chamber of Viscount Maruna was a cold stone jewel tucked into the heart of his estate. Light filtered through narrow stained glass windows, casting fractured reds and purples across the polished floor. The Viscount sat slouched in his chair, chin resting on one hand, his expression the very image of boredom and fatigue. The day had been long and filled with fools. Then the chamber doors opened again. A lone figure entered, calm and unbothered, dressed in finely cut merchant's attire, travel-worn but clean. His eyes were sharp and blue as polished sapphire, and his long green hair was tied back neatly. He bowed with the smoothness of someone who had practiced in front of a mirror, but wasn't trying to grovel. "My Lord Viscount," he said simply, "I bring information regarding Baron Ingle, information I believe you'll find highly relevant." Maruna raised a brow but didn't straighten from his slouch. "If you're here to defend him, you can kindly walk back out before I have you thrown out." The man smirked. "Quite the opposite. I'm the one he tried to cheat and silence. My name is Averius. I have no noble claim, only ledgers, letters, and the truth." That got Maruna to shift forward slightly in his seat. Averius walked to the small table near the throne and gently placed down a thick satchel. With a flick of the clasp, it opened, and the contents began to spill out. At first, Maruna was merely attentive. Avarius presented false ledgers, detailing months of tax fraud and underreported trade income. Then came the forged perfume documents, covering for contraband smuggling using alchemical shipment containers. The Viscount's brow lifted. Next, Avarius laid down statements from dockhands and servants, some of whom had mysteriously vanished shortly after giving them, carefully notarized. Viscount Maruna sat up straighter, his lips twitching. Avarius followed with a letter from a border official describing paid blind spots and bribes, along with routes used to move illegal goods through Baron Ingle's territory. The Viscount chuckled. Oh ho ho, that greasy pig's been playing every angle. He raised a hand. Brennan! A moment later, a tall, pale man in crisp black stepped into the chamber. My lord? The aide asked with stiff courtesy. Come here. You must see this. This man is single-handedly peeling Ingle's fat hide off like a festival roast. Avarius nodded politely to the aide, then revealed the final piece. A sealed letter, bearing the Baron's mark, in which he all but confessed to funneling coin from a Viscount-level tithe to fund his entertainment expenses in 4th Street. Brennan made a choking noise. Viscount Maruna barked out a sudden, delighted laugh. I knew it. That snake, that bloated embarrassment to landholding. Look at him, he shouted, waving the papers. He's dug his own grave and brought the shovel. He was fully upright now, walking down the steps toward Avarius with an energy none of the day's petitioners had stirred in him. You've done me a great favor today, he said, stopping in front of the green-haired man. Now tell me, what do you want? Coin? Land? A contract? Say it. Avarius shook his head lightly. I'm not greedy, my lord. Whatever you see fit is enough for me. I only wanted justice, and to see a cheat fall. Viscount Maruna stared at him for a long moment, then broke into a wide, wolfish grin. You are dangerous, he said with admiration, and exactly the kind of man I might call upon again. Avarius bowed with a hand to his chest. Then I will be available, should you ever need me. Brennan cleared his throat. Shall I begin preparations, my lord? Oh yes, the Viscount said gleefully, waving a document over his head. We're going to nail every page of this to his gate before we drag him in chains to answer for it. Avarius left the chamber with a smile just as sharp as the one Maruna wore. He hadn't just unseated a baron. He'd positioned himself as a problem solver to one of the most influential lords in the region. And all he'd needed was ink, patience, and a little bit of vengeance. A week passed. Baron Ingle, once a smug and bloated thorn in Viscount Maruna's side, made a desperate attempt to flee his lands under cover of night. His carriage was stopped at the southern border, his wigs in one crate and his wine collection in another. He did not run far. His trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming, his execution a public affair. Cheers echoed in the streets of his domain as the axe fell. Peasants toasted with sour ale, and merchants marked the day with discounts. His crest was torn from city gates, his name spat like a curse, and at the center of it all, unseen and smiling, Avarius. 1 week later, he was summoned once more to Viscount Maruna's estate. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. The private hall was warm with sunlight, and the Viscount looked like a man freshly unburdened. His posture relaxed, a goblet of wine in hand, his aide Brennan hovering nearby with the calm of someone who had finally won a long-standing political war. Avarius, the Viscount greeted, standing to extend a hand himself. Come closer. Avarius bowed slightly and approached. Thanks to you, Maruna said, swirling his wine, I have reclaimed control over 6 trade routes, removed a festering embarrassment from my court, and, most importantly, made myself very popular with the people. You've made me look like a man of justice. That's not an easy thing. I'm glad I could be of help, Avarius said with that subtle, measured smile. Maruna gestured to a sealed parchment on the nearby table. For your service, a 2-year exemption from all trade taxes within my territory, a shopfront and small homestead in the lower merchant quarter of my city, and he tossed a pouch forward with a satisfying clink. 24 gold coins. Averius inclined his head. Very generous, my lord. You earned it. There was a pause, then Averius tapped his fingers together with feigned thoughtfulness. Since Baron Ingle's little perfume venture is now defunct, he said lightly, I thought I might take it over. Out of pity, of course. It would be a shame to let all those production lines go to waste. The room went silent. Then, pefti! The Viscount spat half his wine across the table. Ha! He coughed, wheezed, then roared with laughter, slapping the arm of his chair. Brennan simply turned away with a faint grin and shook his head. You snake, Maruna wheezed. You'll gut him twice. Averius shrugged with mock modesty. Only business, my lord. Maruna laughed harder. No, it's art. You've got the instincts of a noble without the birthright. He pointed at him. You'll go far, Averius. Mark my words. Just don't end up with your own little green-haired spy coming for your head one day. Averius gave a soft chuckle. I'll keep an eye out. Chapter 6. Painted in Silver. Paul had been nervous before, but this was different. Standing inside the grand capital estate of House Alreum made him feel like a bricklayer in a ballroom. If the border manor had been impressive, this place looked like wealth itself had been poured over every surface and told to sparkle more. The walls were a rich, vivid green, lined with swirling real silver inlays that shimmered like moonlight when the chandeliers caught them. The floor beneath his boots was a geometric blend of pink and black marble, polished so perfectly it reflected the towering ceiling murals overhead. And lining the corridor like statues, 20 uniformed servants, 10 on each side, standing rigid with eyes forward as if a king were passing through. Paul swallowed hard. He walked in perfect step just behind Wenris, relying on every shred of etiquette Horatio had beaten into him these past weeks. Posture, pace, gaze down, but not submissive, hands still, chin level. It was a routine burned into muscle and mind. Even Cecilia, normally so composed, was visibly tense beside him. Her hands clutched her skirts just a little too tightly, her lips drawn into a line. She was used to the estate. This clearly was different. And then they entered the receiving hall. Duke Gol Alreum sat upon a curved throne-like seat at the head of the room, a man carved from poise and presence. He looked just like the painted portrait in Wenris's study. Tall, broad-shouldered, not a strand of his white-silver hair out of place. His beard was styled meticulously, trimmed with the kind of care reserved for artists. He didn't look like a man, he looked like a symbol. His wife was seated beside him, a vision of noble grace. Her hair coiled high like a woven crown, adorned with small sapphires. Her gown, deep purple and velvet, glimmered with threads of gold at the hem. Even her resting posture was composed like a statue in a royal tomb. The elder brother stood behind them, taller than Wenris, built like a military officer. His tailored uniform bore noble sigils, but everything about him said discipline, from the cut of his jaw to the way he held his gloved hands behind his back. And then there was the youngest sibling, a girl not older than 15, dressed in an explosion of lace, ribbons, and excessive embroidery. Her blonde curls bounced with each movement, and her eyes locked onto Paul the moment he entered the room. Cold, calculating, possessive. The look she gave him was like someone eyeing a prized hound, or a new toy to break. Paul instinctively felt a shiver trickle down his spine. Her expression bore two messages. You don't belong here, and I will make sure you feel that. The welcome was polite, polished, and utterly hollow. The Duke rose, approached Wenris, and gave him a distant, almost ceremonial hug. No warmth, no affection, only tradition. You've grown, he said plainly, before stepping back to his place with the formality of a lord receiving a tax report. The Duchess was more sincere. She embraced her son gently and kissed his forehead with a genuine smile, though her posture never once faltered. Not even her jewelry moved out of place. The older brother extended a firm handshake, measured, emotionless, professional. And the sister? She gave Wenris a single nod. That was it. Paul watched the whole exchange unfold in a matter of moments, feeling the room's temperature drop like a stone tossed into a lake. Damn! This place lost all warmth in less than 30 seconds. The thought wasn't just Paul's, it echoed through all his selves, a shared instinct. Even Avarius paused on his walk through a market, and Esmeralda blinked mid-lipstick touch-up, as if they'd all walked through the same cold wind at once. Paul adjusted his cuffs and kept his eyes respectfully lowered. He had entered the world of power, and it had greeted him not with fire, but ice. The capital manor wasn't a home, it was a monument. After their arrival, the carriages were promptly unpacked, their contents moved with mechanical efficiency. Wenris, Paul, and Cecilia were guided to the eastern wing, where the second son of the Alrayam family had his personal chambers. Not a guest room, not a borrowed bed. His. The hallway alone was marble-floored and subtly perfumed, flanked by crystalline wall sconces and quiet tapestries that likely cost more than Paul's old flatbed truck back on Earth. Even the servants get rooms here, Paul had whispered as they followed the attendant deeper in. Yes, Wenris had answered. We have over 60 available rooms, excluding studies, lounges, guest suites, meeting halls, and the library wing. It's ridiculous. He wasn't wrong. Paul was assigned a small but perfectly furnished bedroom, just a floor down from Wenris's suite. Cecilia was given a similar room next to his. The walls were polished limestone, trimmed in soft rosewood, and the bed frame had silver caps on the posts. Paul stood still for a moment, examining the space. He found 3 floors. 3. That was it. A tuft of grass outside the eastern garden window was half a centimetre taller than the rest. One corner of a marble panel had a small chip. Someone must have dropped something heavy there. And a speck of dirt clung to a windowsill that hadn't been polished yet. Everything else was unnervingly perfect. They changed quickly, fresh uniforms delivered by a silent maid, and rushed to return to Wenris, now in his formal day wear. Paul and Cecilia entered his room together, only to find Zilia Alrayam, the youngest of the noble siblings, standing in the middle of the space, arms crossed, frustration practically steaming from her. Wenris sat on a divan, legs crossed, teacup in hand. I told you once, he said with cool finality, Paul is not for sale, nor will I be handing him over as some gift. He is my personal servant. Go get your own brown-haired attendant, Zilia. The girl's nostrils flared. I hate you! She spun on her heel, stormed past the 2 servants, and shoved Cecilia on her way out. The maid stumbled, nearly falling before Paul caught her by the elbow. Paul stared after the girl, then muttered with deadpan sarcasm, Lovely girl. Cecilia nodded stiffly, brushing off her skirt. You have no idea. Wenris exhaled through his nose as he set the teacup down. Mother gives her everything. Spoiled, doesn't even begin to cover it. I think we need a new word, something stronger. Violently entitled, maybe. Paul chuckled. I'll jot that down. Could make a good book title. Wenris smirked briefly, then stood and stretched, cracking his shoulders. That journey numbed my legs, he said. I need something to snap me back to life. Cecilia, you know Miss Malrius, yes? Yes, my lord. Ask her to help you prepare a melon cake for me. Paul, help me carry some supplies from the merchant quarter. I need to buy a few things, and you're the only one I trust not to shatter a tea kettle on sight. Cecilia bowed. At once, Lord Wenris. Paul grinned and nodded. I'm thrilled to leave with you, Master Wenris. And he meant it. Anything to get out of this perfectly polished, emotionally freezing palace. Avarius opened his eyes in the early dawn, but he had never been asleep. Information slid into his consciousness like oil into water, without resistance or friction. The polished marble halls of the capital manor, the precise layout of the noble district, the conversation between Wenris and his sister, the chipped tile near the east garden, all of it. Paul had seen it, and now Avarius remembered it as if he had lived it. And in a way he had. Being in 3 places at once no longer felt overwhelming. Going from one body to 2 had been disorienting, like trying to listen to 2 songs at once with 1 pair of ears. Adding a third had caused some cognitive static, mild confusion, a sense of emotional layering. But now, it was like breathing. There was no hive mind, no fractured personality. It was 1 mind, 3 vessels. And yet each held a shade of difference, slight, indistinct, like shifting the tone of a color just 1 value. Avarius, for instance, felt sly, not in action but in attitude, a sense of underlying strategy, quiet edge, and fox-like calm. Where Paul was grounded and centered, Avarius watched and wove. And today he was weaving something new. Taking over the perfume trade had been, at a glance, a dream. Established supply lines, a functional bottling facility, leftover stock, and even a few loyal employees clinging to stability after the Baron's fall. Setting up the storefronts, easy. Getting them to thrive, less so. The problem wasn't infrastructure, it was trust. To the nobles and merchant elite, Avarius was a new face with no lineage, no patrons, and a staff of cleaned-up ruffians plucked from the underworld. Most were former cutthroats or smugglers he'd personally reformed, men and women who owed him more than coin, but still looked like they'd rob a spice cart before lunch. Perfume was a luxury. Nobles only bought from names, reputable lines, makers of subtle refinement and long-standing vanity. And with each bottle lasting weeks or months, there wasn't even enough repeat traffic to rely on volume. He needed a pivot, a new product and a new tactic, a new face. The idea had come in layers, like everything in Paul's shared mind. It started with Esmeralda applying a sweet citrus scent backstage before a performance. Then came Paul, walking past a noblewoman discussing brand loyalty and face value. Finally, Avarius, watching 2 upper-class ladies scoff at his signage outside his shop. It clicked. They didn't trust him, but they would trust her. Beautiful, elegant, adored by the public. Let Esmeralda wear the brand. Let her talk about it. Let her represent it. Let the nobles whisper, she wears it. Let the masses say, she made it famous. That's when sales would flow. With a fresh vial in hand and a sparkle of a new marketing plan blooming behind his eyes, Avarius stepped into the rising sun. 3 bodies, 1 mind, and now 1 brand. The name had taken a day to decide. Scheherazade, elegant, exotic, a whisper of desert wind and noble silks. It carried just enough mystique to be memorable, and enough syllables to sound expensive. The first fragrance? Desert lily, light, fresh and rich with a soft undertone of honeyed wood and a finish of late summer florals. Refined, alluring, memorable. Avarius held the crystalline bottle up to the sunlight streaming through his office window. The glass glinted gold and green, the liquid inside dancing like honeyed fire. He turned and stepped into the adjoining room. Dirk! His second-in-command jumped slightly, caught mid-count with a small pile of silver coins. Yes, boss. I need you to take this to Onutan. There's a woman there, traveling with the circus. Her name is Esmeralda. Get this to her before the festival starts. Dirk blinked. Boss, that's in 2 days. I'd have to ride non-stop. Change horses every time one tires. I don't care what it costs. She needs this before she steps on stage. Dirk looked at the bottle, then at Avarius, then sighed as if his very bones were tired. I want a big bonus after this. You'll get it. Avarius handed him a heavy satchel filled with silver. Make sure it gets to her unbroken. Dirk gently secured the perfume bottle in padded leather, shouldered the satchel and ran out the door, shouting for the stable hands before he even reached the stairs. Avarius watched him go. Let's hope he makes it. Let's hope he makes it. The exact same words escaped Esmeralda's lips. Frev, one of the circus hands, happened to be walking by. "Did you say something?" he asked. Esmeralda blinked, then waved him off with a smile. "Oh, nothing. Just waiting on a merchant. I ordered a perfume." Frev raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Just as he left, Juno swept in from the left, red hair bouncing, smelling faintly of sawdust and chalk. "You ordered perfume?" she asked. "When? And with what money? Don't tell me the boss is spoiling you while the rest of us get paid in bread and old tights." Esmeralda chuckled softly as she adjusted the sequined fringe on her outfit. "Nothing like that. It's from an old friend. He owed me a favor." "Mm-hmm." Juno narrowed her eyes, but she grinned anyway. "Well, if it smells good, I expect a sample." "You'll get one. Might even share the bottle." "You better. I ran out of the cheap stuff Grant gave me last spring. I work just as hard as you know. And a lady needs to smell like more than sweat and rope." Esmeralda rolled her eyes. "Grant tried to seduce me last night." "Again?" Juno made a face. "I swear he's tried every girl in this troupe at least once. He's harmless, though. Sad little lover boy." Esmeralda shrugged. "I'm not mad, just exhausted by the effort." "Same." Juno tugged her sleeves tight, rolling her neck. 10 minutes to curtain," the stage master bellowed from across the tent. Esmeralda smiled faintly. Soon the perfume would arrive. Soon the scent of desert lily would fill the air. And soon every noble in Onutan would know the name Scheherazade. The capital's noble district was a world unto itself. Here even the air seemed expensive. Carriages sparkled, guards wore ceremonial armor with gold-threaded sashes, and even the merchant shops bore no signage. Just subtle family crests or stylized emblems that only the wealthy recognized. Paul walked 2 steps behind Wenris, arms full, posture steady, playing his role to perfection. He looked every bit the attentive servant, but behind his calm eyes he was a storm of quiet amusement. Wenris, gleefully burdening the economy 1 store at a time, had been shopping non-stop. A bottle of rare wine for his father, new silk gloves, sky blue, for his mother, a decorative dagger with an emerald pommel for his brother, and 3 different boxes of sweets for his frilly little sister. He even bought a few wrapped items that he didn't show Paul. Paul didn't ask. As Wenris vanished into yet another shop, Paul was left outside, holding 4 elegantly wrapped boxes like a parade float. He gazed at the blue sky, while Esmeralda, on the other side of the kingdom, was thrilling crowds under circus lights. 2 worlds, 1 mind, 1 very smug smile curled on Paul's lips. Wenris stepped out with 2 more boxes. "All done," he said, satisfied. "Before we head back," Paul spoke up calmly, "may I suggest something?" Wenris perked up. "Of course, say it." "There's a new perfume shop down in the Middle District. I overheard a noble lady mention it. Apparently it's the new scent everyone's whispering about. Something like share something. Maybe Scheherazade. Might be a perfect gift for your mother, especially if she wants to stay ahead of the trend." Wenris's eyes lit up. "Genius. No wonder I made you my advisor. Let's go." And just like that, the young noble launched into a full power walk, his noble coat fluttering behind him like a cape. Paul followed, smirk sharpening as he juggled his growing tower of luxury. If the Duchess of House Al Rayam starts wearing it, the whole district will go mad for it. 10 minutes later, a 7th box was added to the leaning tower in Paul's arms. By the time they reached the estate, they played delivery boy and valet all in one, visiting room to room, gift by gift. Each delivery shrank the stack, until only 2 boxes remained as they stood before the ornate doors of the Duchess's suite. Lady Gavel Al Rayam was as regal as ever, seated behind her embroidery table in the same flowing purple dress, her posture queen-like even in private. She rose when Wenris entered, arms opening for a brief but heartfelt embrace. "Oh, my thoughtful son," she said with a warm smile. "And 2 gifts? Is there a special reason?" Wenris grinned. "Not really, just wanted to surprise you." She opened the first box, delicately lifting the new silk gloves. "Oh, blue this time. These will go perfectly with the seafoam ensemble." Then she lifted the second lid. Scheherazade? I haven't heard of this one." Paul kept his expression polite, silent as always. "My servant Paul overheard a few noble ladies talking about it. Supposedly it's the next big thing. Thought you might enjoy it before the rest of the city catches on." The Duchess raised her eyebrows with mild intrigue. Desert Lily, such a charming name. She gave the bottle a quick test spray along her inner elbow. She paused, then her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, lovely. Fresh, warm, and not too heavy. I'll be bragging about this at my next tea party for sure." She turned toward Paul, smile softening. "Give your servant a bonus." She looked him over again, eyes catching on the Minsira family crest button sewn into his collar. "Well now, a favor token from House Minsira." Her voice held a note of real surprise. "You're collecting quite the reputation, aren't you?" She looked to Wenris. "Make sure to keep this one close. I see a head butler in the making." Paul bowed slightly, hiding the knowing glint in his eyes. Checkmate. The corridor back to Wenris's chambers was quiet, only the sound of soft slippers and echoing footsteps. Paul balanced 2 packages under one arm, a red box and a white one. He glanced down at them curiously. Who else did he buy gifts for? A friend in the capital, maybe? Or a noble lady? Paul shook the thought aside and followed Wenris in. Inside, the room was already aglow with welcoming comfort. Cecilia stood near the window, her posture crisp, her expression composed, but her eyes lit up the moment she saw them. "Perfect timing, my lord," she said, bowing gracefully. On the coffee table, a small silver tray waited beneath a glass dome. Steam curled from a porcelain teapot beside it. "The melon cake has cooled just enough. I even steeped a jasmine blend to go with it." "You are a gem, Cecilia," Wenris grinned, tossing his coat onto the bed with a dramatic flair and flopping down onto the sofa like a boy in his own fortress. "Cut 3 slices, please. I want to share this one properly." He turned to Paul. "Also, give the white box to Cecilia. The red one is yours." Paul blinked. "My lord?" he asked, raising an eyebrow as he gently handed off the boxes. Cecilia gasped softly, her hand fluttering to her lips. "My lord, you didn't have to." Paul chuckled. "Ah, now I get why you didn't let me into those last 2 shops." Then, catching himself, he dipped into a low bow. "I most humbly accept your generosity." Wenris waved off the formality with a pleased smirk. "You're both stuck with me for the festival. I can't have my personal staff looking like back-alley errand runners, can I?" The cake was as sweet and airy as spun dreams. The chilled melon flavor melted on the tongue, balanced perfectly by the jasmine tea. Cecilia served it with grace, and for once she smiled openly. Inside her white box was a delicate silver hairpin, topped with 2 butterfly wings, each studded with tiny opalescent gems that shimmered when she turned her head. She placed it in her hair immediately, blushing softly. Paul, meanwhile, unfolded a decorative vest, made from dark navy velvet and embroidered with understated silver thread. Not gaudy, but striking. It had the weight and cut of something tailored for nobles. He started but couldn't finish. The gesture hit deeper than expected. "It'll look good on you," Wenris said casually, sipping his tea. "You've earned it. Besides, how could I let my closest servant look dull when I walk into the festival?" Then he leaned back with a grin that was pure satisfaction. The cake was good, the company better, and the memory of Zilia's face, tight with jealousy as he walked past her with sweets and Paul, was a silent cherry on top. She had thanked him, through gritted teeth, but she'd thanked him. He hadn't even needed to say a word to rub it in. The capital of the Kingdom of Summer came alive like a dream, painted in fire and gold. For one night each year, politics paused. Scribes set down their quills, merchants locked up their ledgers, and even the nobles looked down from their balconies, not with disdain, but with curiosity. This was the summer festival, a celebration not just of the kingdom's founding, but of its spirit, its resilience, its color, its people. The city streets had transformed overnight. Winding ribbons of glowing magic lanterns floated above every main road, soft orbs of shifting light that pulsed in rhythm with distant music. Some danced on their own, twisting through the air like jellyfish in slow-motion ballets, illuminating faces and cobblestone with gentle radiance. From rooftops and towers, fireworks exploded into the evening sky in spectacular bursts. Red, gold, sapphire, blue, they bloomed like celestial flowers, casting vivid reflections onto the polished white stones of the noble district and the riverside plazas. At ground level, vendors lined every street, hawking roasted meats on skewers, candied fruits spun on sticks like edible jewels. Chilled wine, grilled fish, steaming buns, and paper cones filled with spicy nuts. Scent trails tangled in the air and made every passerby's stomach growl. Jugglers flipped torches, mages painted patterns in the air with colored flame, and musicians filled the avenues with the clatter of drums and the high, sweet wail of flutes. Children danced barefoot in chalk-drawn circles, while older teens tried to mimic the ceremonial waltzes practiced by nobles, badly and with laughter. In the noble district, things were more elegant, but no less dazzling. Wenris stood near the arched balcony of his family's estate, gazing at the crowds gathering below and the lanterns blooming to life along the garden walkways. "Feels warmer tonight than most," Paul said beside him, his decorative vest catching hints of gold from the overhead lights. Cecilia stood just behind, hairpin gleaming with every turn of her head. Wenris grinned. "The whole kingdom seems to exhale on this day. No wars, no border squabbles, no council bickering. Just good wine, too much food, and the illusion that everything's all right." He turned. "Come, I want to see it properly, not from behind a railing." They stepped out into the walkway leading to the central plaza where nobles and wealthy citizens were beginning to gather, gowns swirling, shoes clicking, glasses clinking. A grand stage had been built at the edge of the district, where dancers, illusionists, and acrobats would perform through the night. The summer festival had begun, and beneath the fireworks, amid music and laughter, the first threads of destiny stirred quietly in the heat of summer air. At the heart of Onutan, the second jewel of the kingdom, the summer festival was no less radiant than in the capital. But here, the celebration felt closer. There were no gilded walls separating nobles from commoners. The great central plaza overflowed with people of every standing: fishermen, tailors, merchants, retired soldiers, students, and city officials all stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit by firelight and magic. Laughter echoed off polished stone, magic lights bobbed between market stalls, musicians played until their fingers ached. And in the very center of it all, beneath a towering silk-draped arch of the traveling circus, Esmeralda danced. Dirk had arrived just past noon, sweat-drenched and wild-eyed, clutching a satchel and a single perfume bottle like it was holy scripture. She received it with a wink and a kiss on the cheek. He nearly fainted. By sunset, the scent of desert lily trailed behind her like the wind itself had fallen in love with her. Subtle, alluring, unmistakable. 7 full dances were booked from afternoon till midnight. She enchanted the stage. Rainbow glitter spiraled in arcs from her hands as she spun. Sparks traced her ankles like fireworks chasing her steps. Her long pink hair caught every flicker of light, and when she leapt, it was like watching a rose petal carried by wind. Every movement flowed with grace and explosive flair, mesmerizing and impossible to ignore. The audience was swept into her rhythm. Cheers rose after every turn. By the end of her final act, the entire plaza was on its feet in a standing ovation. Applause thundered like a storm. Whistles pierced the night. A few children tried to mimic her dance. Lovers clung tighter. More than one person forgot to breathe. She bowed deeply, and the scent of desert lily drifted through the air. The brand was sealed. In the capital, Paul flushed red in the face as the rush of applause echoed in his mind from hundreds of kilometers away. Standing beside Wenris and Cecilia in the well-ordered noble square, he had the oddest sensation of hearing cheers no one else could hear, feeling eyes on him that weren't there. Esmeralda's grace, her charm, her beauty, all of it belonged to him too, and part of him still hadn't gotten used to the idea of being stared at like that, of owning a body so alluring, so powerful in its elegance, yet so different from his own. He rubbed his cheek. "You okay, Paul?" Cecilia asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're blushing." "I might have had one drink too many," he said quickly, flashing a crooked smile. "Nonsense," Wenris said from beside him, already lifting a glass. "If any day calls for letting go, this is the one. Relax, Paul. I'm giving you the night off." He clapped him on the back, turning to mingle with the crowd. Wenris knew well this was his only night of freedom. For the next 5 days, he'd be neck-deep in tea parties, political chatter, noble suitors, and a dozen fake smiles. Tonight they were just 3 people enjoying the warmth of firelight, wine, and music. And in another city, beneath another sky, Paul basked in the glow of starlight and applause from a crowd that didn't even know his name. Paul was drunk, not falling over the balcony drunk, just enough to feel warm, a little reckless, and entirely too relaxed. It was only thanks to his better-trained mind, Averius, that he managed to find the right bedroom, collapse onto the feather mattress, and pass out with a dumb smile still on his face. Far across the city, Averius blinked once, then stretched as he rose from his desk. "I am not drinking that much again," he muttered in Paul's voice, rolling his shoulders. With the main body unconscious and Esmeralda preoccupied by social attention, he alone had full clarity. Surprisingly, the split didn't disrupt anything. In fact, it enhanced his focus. His thoughts sharpened like a blade. All perfume stock is ready, riders are prepped. But what happens if we flood the shelves? He tapped the table. No, scarcity creates hunger. Exclusivity breeds obsession. Only 30 bottles per shop, per week. Not more. Hype oversupply. And when they run out... A grin spread on his face. Tokens. Tangible proof that you're important enough to reserve one. A mark of prestige. He stood abruptly and clapped a fist into his palm. "I am a genius." Moments later, he was down in the bottling facility, issuing new orders. Rations per location. No overstock. And the printers began pressing small, elegant red-silver tokens, each engraved with the Scheherazade insignia and a weekly number. Onutan, morning after the show. Esmeralda could barely walk 5 steps without someone stopping her. "You were stunning last night. Where did the sparkles come from? What is that scent you're wearing?" She answered every question with poise and a charming smile. "It's from a new supplier," she said, producing the now half-full bottle of Desert Lily. "He's a fan of my dancing, so I got the first one." She laughed softly. "It's not even in shops here. Yet." That one word, yet, ignited something in the hearts of her listeners. They scattered like hungry birds, desperate to find the source. The only problem? There was no shop in Onutan. Not yet. Demand exploded instantly. By noon, letters were being written, messengers dispatched, and more than a few nobles complained loudly about the unacceptable lack of availability. Exactly as planned. Capital, Duchess Ulraeum's morning tea. In the elegant rose garden, the Duchess held court. 8 noblewomen sat beneath a white linen canopy, each dressed in pastel silks and soft feathers, sipping chilled wine and speaking in practiced tones. But one thing stood out like a blooming rose in a sea of lavender. Her scent. It was not powdery nor overpowering. It was crisp, gentle, and new. Curious glances turned her way. Raised brows, delicate fans paused mid-wave. "Oh, this," she said, dabbing her wrist with a smile. "It's a gift from my son. Scheherazade, I believe it's called. It's already the best scent in the kingdom. Haven't you heard?" She knew exactly what she was doing. Her voice oozed casual superiority as she leaned back and let the attention wash over her. By midday, all 29 remaining bottles in the noble district were gone. The poor shopkeep stammered explanations to frantic servants and high-born errand boys. The next delivery wouldn't come until the end of the festival. By then, the name Scheherazade would be carved into the city's obsession. Paul, meanwhile, was stone-faced at the noble ball, dressed in his gifted vest, holding a polished silver tray. He had mentally blocked out the sensory feedback from his other bodies just to keep himself from grinning like a lunatic. And yet, he couldn't stop the warm satisfaction from creeping in. That was until Lady Incarius, one of the shrewder noblewomen, approached him with a smirk. Her perfume, unmistakably desert lily. Without a word, she set a button, adorned with her family crest, on the tray beside the wine flutes. A silent nod. A secret custom. Paul didn't flinch. He bowed slightly, collected the token, and slipped it into his vest pocket. Another door opened, another house unknowingly aligned with him. He moved to the next guest, smiling politely. Behind the mask of a servant, the true architect of the festival's biggest craze walked unnoticed through the ballroom, one step ahead of everyone. "This is my death." Wenris Alraim groaned dramatically, slouched halfway across the velvet-backed chaise lounge. One foot dangled free, the other in the gentle grip of Cecilia, who was massaging his heel with practiced patience. "I hate these stupid ball shoes," he muttered. "My legs are dying." Cecilia winced in sympathy. "Yeah, they're brutal. I feel you, young master." The room was bathed in the amber light of late afternoon. The second ball of the day had just ended, and the scent of polished floors, perfume, and too sweet wine still lingered in the air. Paul, standing by the window with sleeves rolled and posture relaxed, felt a flicker of amusement. He doesn't know how lucky he is. I'm not letting him feel the ache from two other bodies right now. At least Paul got to wear his modern-day work boots, cleaned and polished to a mirror sheen, and still the most comfortable footwear in the entire palace. He adjusted his collar slightly, then cleared his throat. "Lord Wenris, I received another button today," Paul said casually. "Should I sew it beside the Mincera one?" Wenris raised a brow and sat up straighter, curiosity overriding foot pain for a moment. "Of course you should. Who was it this time?" Paul reached into his vest pocket and revealed the small, finely crafted crest button, gold-edged and bearing the distinct emblem of House Incarius. Wenris gave a low whistle. "Well now, that's a score." He stood, slipping into his indoor slippers with a quiet sigh, and walked over to Paul. The Incarius family is at the top of every merchant trend. Anything they even glance at becomes the next great obsession. If they've pinned you with a favor mark. He gave Paul a nod of approval. "That's real weight." Paul twirled the button between his fingers thoughtfully. "So, just to be sure, these mean they owe me a favor, right?" "Right," Wenris replied, pouring himself a glass of red from the decanter near his writing desk. "Though I don't think Horatio gave you the whole story." He turned back, swirling the wine. "You see, yes, these can absolutely be redeemed. Walk into their estate, show the button, and they'd have to honor it. A favor, a request, maybe even an audience with their lord." "But?" Paul asked, already hearing the pause coming. Wenris smiled. "Exactly. But there's prestige involved." He walked back, standing beside Paul now, tone more serious. "These buttons are status symbols. Only noble houses can give them out, and only servants of other noble houses can receive them. I can't give you one myself. It would look like I'm artificially inflating my own staff's worth. It's a subtle game of favor and recognition." Paul nodded slowly. "So they're more valuable unspent?" "Exactly. Most servants keep them forever. They show them discreetly, like medals. Every button says, "Look who trusts me." If you trade it in for a favor, it's spent, gone, and most will assume you're either greedy or stupid. Paul tucked the button carefully away. Got it. Prestige over payout. Wenris smirked, lifting his glass. You're learning fast. I've got a good teacher. Wenris chuckled. Advisor or not, good advice goes both ways. He took a sip, then waved a hand casually. Anyway, I'm calling the rest of the day off. Both of you, rest. Eat, drink, stretch your legs. Tomorrow we face yet another battlefield of etiquette and empty praise. Cecilia sighed in relief. Bless you, my lord. Paul cracked a tired grin. Now that's a command I'll follow. And for a brief, precious moment, the weight of court life lifted just a little.